your niche and monetize that niche. Like Kevin Kelly had this great essay about 15 years ago called "The 1,002 Fans," and Kelly's thesis was this: that if you get 1,000 people who love your work and are willing to pay $100 a year, that's $100,000 a year, and that's enough. Now that's already come true because if you look at your typical Substack subscription rate, it's $100 a year, right? And there are a bunch of people who mainstream media has ignored who are actually making really good money over there. And there was an essay about 4 or 5 years back by a Chinese lady, I forget her name, apologies, called 100 True Fans. And her thesis was if you find 100 True Fans, will give you $1,000 a year, it's the same amount of money, right? And I'm fortunate enough to have found both, right? And my big learning there was something that Paul Graham once said in the context of startups, that it's better to be loved by a few and liked by many. And this is something I don't think a lot of marketers get yet, that they'll go on YouTube and they'll see a video with millions of views. But my point is, how deep is the engagement and how deep is the love? Right? I used to say back in the day that I'd rather have 100,000 people download an episode of mine than 10 million people watch a YouTube video. Right? And the reason for that is the average viewing time of each of those YouTube videos may be like 15 seconds, whereas my average session time is 40 minutes. And when I was an internet professional 15 years back, if you told me this, I would have laughed. I would have laughed at you. I would have said, maybe it's a deeply immersive video game. But this is not a humble brag. It's actually true for all long form podcasts that you have that kind of immersion. You'll have an absolute number, which is smaller than the absolute number of something much more popular and clickbaity. But that doesn't matter. What matters is the level of the engagement. And the other great learning I had about the creator economy is it doesn't matter if marketing people and advertising people don't get this, because I can monetize myself directly. That the people who love my work want to pay for it, want to, right? Earlier, what would happen is, let's say we are in the 1990s, I want to write an article, right? So I write an 800 word piece, I send it to the Times of India. They aggregate a whole bunch of such articles and they aggregate eyeballs and they sell those eyeballs to advertisers. I get a tiny chunk of that. Today, they are all gone. The Times of India is gone, and the advertiser is gone. Like the mainstream is crumbling. Today, I can go directly to the reader and make money. And this is something YouTubers have discovered. People build communities through Discord and various other ways, through Substack, for example, where you own your email IDs, no matter which newsletter platform you're hosted on. So the idea is you build a community. Like 30 years back, if Jerry wrote an article in TOI, for example, or wherever, I might read the byline and say, "Huh, Jerry Pinto writes well. That's interesting." 3 weeks later, I might see him in Indian Express and say, "Huh, name sounds familiar. Writes well." Today, I read something by him if it's on his newsletter. I can put my email ID, and then forever, I belong to the community of Jerry Pinto fans, and he has access to me. He wants to make a documentary, he can crowdsource the funds. He wants to make a movie or he starts some new venture he wants me to know about. I'm part of that. So creators are coming in touch with their audiences directly. And that is an incredibly drastic change. So both in terms of A, you don't need to scale, B, you don't need all these middlemen, whether it is a mainstream publication or the advertiser, and you can reach your audience directly. They're both incredibly empowering, which is why it's such a thrill to be on this journey because I didn't know this shit, right? I can give you the full theory behind it right now, but it's stuff that I learned by doing and every once in a while stepping back and saying, wow, this is how it works. Couldn't have thunk.
So that's interesting that you say this is all ex post facto knowledge. It's not something you knew going in. So it was probably a really risky step that you took then because you didn't know all this stuff back then. So did you feel, had you made enough money playing poker that you could take that risk?
I was a professional poker player for 5 years. But while I made money playing poker, I didn't make a few money. I mean, that's part of the reason I left. It didn't scale to that level. But no, I was just idealistic in the sense that, the Seen and the Unseen started as a side project. It wasn't my main game. So I was like, yeah, let me do this. So for the first 4 years, it made no money at all. It was a pure labor of love. And, my advice to all creators is that there is a paradox here that if you really want to make big money, then you can't do it for the money. If you do it for the money, you won't be able to do it because instantly you will want that immediate gratification, you will want validation. And once you start chasing those, the purity of the enterprise goes, right? Like, Ali Abdal has this great video on YouTube. He's a YouTube creator on productivity. So when he reached 1 million fans, he put out this video where he showed the graph of how he got there. And it's an exponential curve, right? And his point was that when he made his 50th video, that's when he got his 1,000th fan. Now, most young creators, will simply give up if they, have that few fans early on. What creators tend to do is we tend to overestimate the short term and underestimate the long term. We imagine, oh, I'll start a channel, I'll start a Substack, it'll go viral, I'll be a star, I'll be an influencer, etc., etc. That shit simply doesn't happen. And if you're playing for that validation, when that validation doesn't come, you stop, you do something else. That's terrible. But if you're playing for love, you continue. And that constant iteration is what makes for excellence, right? Abdal's great advice to new YouTubers, in fact, is that if you're making 2 videos a week, for the first 2 years, don't look at the numbers. Just do those 200 videos, don't look at the numbers. And this is important not just because growth is organic and takes time to happen, but how do you get good? Every time you start doing something, you suck at it. It's definitional, you will. But you only get good at it by doing it again and again and again and again. And if your motivation is that, oh, I'm going to make money, I'm going to get validation, then you never end up doing that. But if your motivation is, this is something I love doing, I'm going to stick to it, you're going to do it. Now, I understand that not everyone has the good fortune, and even I didn't, honestly. It was very impractical, a lot of the choices I made in my life back then. Not everyone has a good fortune to say that I'm going to do something for love, right? But the point is that if you actually want to make it big, that's how you have to go. Like I came across this great video on Twitter, via Twitter yesterday, in fact, by this dude who was quoting Dante's first lines of the comedy, and I forget them exactly, but it's something to the effect of, I took a long road and at the end of the wood I realized that there was no path in front of me. And the idea is, the point this guy is trying to make is that that's when you know you're doing something meaningful. When there's no path in front of you, you're stepping into the unknown, and then you keep going and you make that path. And that's what you have to do. If you're just going to try to figure out what do other people want, what is trending, and make a video on that, it's not going to go anywhere. That's a part of mediocrity. You're just going to you're going to kill your soul as well when you do that.
I don't know what middle class. Thank you. I don't know what middle class India is like. But middle class Sri Lanka, we are brought up very risk averse, and we are told this is the path. You become doctor, lawyer, accountant, engineer, that kind of thing, and then you carry on. You have a career and you do your thing. I'm assuming your father was a civil servant, so I'm assuming that he probably had a traditional outlook towards life as well. How did you manage to break away from that, become a journalist, and then consider telling him, Dad, I'm playing poker online professionally now? How did they take that? How much courage does it take to break away those shackles?
So when I was young, I was a rebel with torn jeans and long hair, and my dad kind of gave up on me and said, "Okay, do what the fuck you want." But that worked out. Like, luckily, there was never any pressure on me in that sense. But I was earning from the time I was 20.